Welcome to Savage Minds. I'm your host, Julian Vigo. Today's guest is Haim Bresheeth, a filmmaker and historian. His books include the best-selling Introduction to the Holocaust and An Army Like No Other. His films include the BBC Two State of Danger. Haim is the founder of Jewish Network for Palestine and the Convivencia Alliance. I welcome Haim Bresheeth to Savage Minds. I am very happy to have you back on the show. The last time we spoke was in 2021, and how things have changed. I have learned from you about your arrest, and I would like to maybe start with a discussion about the censorship around discussing and manifesting against the genocide in Gaza.
Sure. This is a condition spreading through the Western collective that is attacking Gaza through Israel. And with Israel, Israel is not alone in the attack on Gaza. It's the collective West which is carrying out this, without which Israel could do nothing. The United States has to fly sometimes thousands of flights every week in order to replenish the enormous sums of munitions that Israel is, throwing over Gaza. The numbers are very simply staggering because what Israel has already done is dispensed the equivalent of 8 nuclear bombs of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki type. Basically, the freedom of expression, which is supposedly guaranteed in Western democracies, does not exist anymore. And it does not exist because the so-called democracies of the West, or the collective West, which is supporting Israel's attack on Gaza, is actually silencing any critics that it can get through its change of legal status, of demonstration, of publication, of reporting, and freedom of speech, which is basically lost to Western democracy citizens. So in order to continue doing what they are doing in Gaza, the collective West has instigated different laws in different countries, but all in all, they enable a collective silencing of the enormous amount and types of voices which are actually speaking against the war crimes that the West has and continues to affect. So basically, what we have learned is that, we were told by Archbishop Tutu and Nelson Mandela about 25 years ago, nobody is free until the Palestinians are free. So this has become a litmus test of Western society. Basically, it was admitted by Friedrich Merz, the chancellor in Germany, when he said, we have to help Israel because it's doing the dirty work for us. The dirty work is, of course, colonialism and imperialism in the Arab East and in West Asia. So what Gaza has done is put at the heart of international interest and international commitment what once was apartheid South Africa. So the South African moment of the Palestinian liberation struggle has already arrived. It is with us here. Tens and hundreds of millions of people demonstrate everywhere, and wherever they do so in the West, they are attacked, they are arrested, they are silenced, they are incarcerated, and basically besmirched with anti-Semitism, as if the real criminals were people criticizing the crime rather than the criminals who are affecting it. So it's okay to kill hundreds of thousands of people, including, huge amounts of children. That's fine. What is not fine is to criticize the crime. To criticize the crime is a crime itself, while the crime is getting scot-free. So the ICC and ICJ have become, rather than courts, they've become criminal organizations, according to the US and UK and Europe, where the Americans are speaking quite openly in Congress about bombing the ICC and ICJ. They have actually sanctioned the judges. If the judges try to appear in the United States, they will be imprisoned. And this is true in some European countries. So we have now a new reality where international law, rights that were considered totally normal in any country in Europe and elsewhere, are now removed from the citizenship. And the citizens are actually under surveillance. And the danger is they might criticize Israel's crimes in Gaza. I think this is a new reality that didn't exist anywhere in modern time, in our living memory that I can think of.
You were arrested last year. Could you tell our listeners where you were and the conditions of your arrest and what you face, legally speaking, as someone who is in the UK where Palestine action has been prescribed, although that will come under scrutiny by the Supreme Court? And what is happening on the level, even personally? When you were there, did you see that some of the police officers were maybe not completely in agreement with their mandate to be arresting people protesting a genocide?
First, I want to say that in comparison to what happens in Gaza, our removal of freedom of speech looks puny and not serious. But of course, this is not the case, because if we give up our right to protest and right to actually judge what our governments are doing, then we're giving up on democracy, and we should never do that. So I think that's why we are discussing those removal of rights. But we should always remember that indeed, in comparison to what the Israelis are doing and what the other Western democracies are doing, this is, less serious, of course, by, a whole, set of criteria. Now, I was arrested very early in the game. Actually, it was almost exactly a year ago, on the 1st of November, 24. I think I was either the first or the second member of the public that was arrested under terrorism legislation. So it wasn't in connection with Palestine Action. That came later. It was because I spoke about Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, saying that to the best of my knowledge and understanding, there is no way Israel can defeat them. And I was basing this on what some Israeli military figures have written in Haaretz. Now, I was speaking outside the residence of the Israeli ambassador to the UK. She is a real terrorist. She has called early in the genocide for 600,000 Palestinians to be killed by Israel because, she said, that's the number of Germans that the Allies killed in 1945 at the end of the war. Now, I think she was wrong on a number of counts. First, she was wrong about the number of Germans killed. And secondly, she was very wrong legally to call for genocide. So you would have thought that a proper regime of justice would either take her to court for calling for genocide, which is under British law, as any other country in Europe, an illegal act, and actually also under the Genocide Convention. Anyone calling for genocide is guilty of genocide. But instead, she continued to serve with no sanctions whatsoever. So Britain was actually breaking the law by not arresting her, or at least ejecting her from the country as someone who has broken the law. In that context, I was speaking to people who are coming every week to demand her rejection and expulsion from Britain. She, by the way, has finished her period as ambassador and returned, and was replaced by someone, if possible, even more deluded and disturbing than herself. A short while after my speech, two policemen came and told me that I'm under arrest and led me away. There was a crowd of people shouting and opposing the arrest. But of course, they didn't act physically in any way. And so I was taken away, as opposed to what the law says. I was not told exactly what I've done, which was wrong. I was just told that I'm arrested under the Terror Act 2000, Section 12, which attracts 14 years in jail, or could attract 14 years in jail if I was found to have done this. Also, I was told that what I said was hate speech. I don't use hate speech. I never do. I'm a pacifist. So I said to them that I don't think that they could relate this to me because I have not uttered any hate speech. And they said all this will be discussed in court at the time. They took many hours to properly bring me before the desk sergeant in a station, because they kept me for hours. This was the 1st of November, but a very cold evening, and I was kept in a car park by two policemen and not let into the station. And I've asked a number of times, but they wouldn't let me in. They also refused to agree that it's their duty to collect my medications from my home, because I'm a cancer and heart patient, and I'm taking medications 4 times a day. So if I don't take them on time, my life is in danger. I explained all that, and the sergeant in the van that took me to the police station told me, it's your own fault. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, when you you stand and speak, you should actually think that you may be arrested and take your medications everywhere with you. And I said, I had no plans to break the law, and therefore I'm not carrying my medications everywhere. Thank you for your advice, but I think that's ridiculous. And he understood that what he said was really like being judge and jury, instead of being a policeman. And the police in the van also understood that. And I think in the long run, that was a factor in them having to free me, because he obviously was speaking out of turn, and a judge would have dismissed the case if this was coming up in court. But they kept me for hours without medications, and after a long time, they agreed to give me a glass of water. Just standing for hours was very painful for me, and after a while, they agreed to get a chair so I could sit, but they wouldn't let me into the station. So after about 4 hours, I was let into the station and arrested properly. And all I want to say is, this is not Gaza. I wasn't tortured. I was not treated nicely, but I wasn't treated badly in any way that I can, okay, they didn't give me my medications, but I wasn't mishandled physically, etc. So we can take this. They will not silence us by doing that. But they waited. I had to take my medications between 7 and 8 in the evening, and they waited until 1 o'clock at night, when I really was very vociferous, hammering on the cell door and demanding my medications. And only then they agreed to allow me to take them. So on the whole, I don't think they were looking after my rights very carefully.
What has happened with your case? Did you go to a trial? Were you heard?
No, I think 2 people from the terror squad came to interview me at about 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning, and spent 2 hours asking me very bizarre questions. And of course, I am not a terrorist, and they didn't think I'm a terrorist. So the whole thing had, an air of a farce. And I think that's what's happening now in British court. It's farcical. They know none of us are terrorists. They know that the British government is assisting terror, real terror, and yet they go on with these procedures. I most of the time said no comments to those 2 hours of questions, but every now and then I said, I think that you are actually wasting police time by actually asking me questions that you know the answer for, and you know that this is all nonsense. But they went on through the list of questions like they were automatons. So I think they also felt bizarre about it, as did the policemen that arrested me. They didn't feel that they're doing something very important by arresting me. Not only that, they didn't know why they arrested me. And I think the hours that passed in a car park were because they didn't know what to put at my door as the crime. And there were arguments on the telephone, which of course I didn't hear the other side, but there were many arguments about what to charge me with. In the end, those 2 terror squad members decided that there is nothing they can charge me with, and they passed it to the public prosecution office, who after 3 days told which is a record time, told my solicitor that there will be no further action. So they never charged me because there was nothing to charge me with. And I think that's the case with the thousands of people now under arrest. At the time, I was the only, civilian, if you want. In other words, not a journalist. Before me, 2 journalists were arrested, but no member of the public was arrested for speaking at a demo. After, they've changed the law, and now more than 2,000 people are waiting to be questioned and charged. Now, not only that, they changed the regulations that each trial can only take up to 36 minutes.
Yeah.
Of all those thousands. So in 36 minutes, you have to say who you are, what your name is, where you live, the rest of it. They have to present the accusation. You have to say what you think about it. You have to bring witnesses, all this in 36 minutes. Of course, this is kind of East German type of police work. And basically, it's breaking the law in an illegal way. So there is no way in which justice of any kind can be carried out in Britain. I don't know the situation in other places very well, but my friends in France and in Germany are telling me very similar stories.
It's interesting to see that while nothing happened to you from your arrest last year, that there seems to be now a groundwork that has been laid out to enable the British government to now charge people. And I don't just mean the prescription. Prior to that, there's been the redefinition by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance that has been basically proselytizing around university campuses to get administrators to adopt the IHRA definition of antisemitism, such that it rather conflates Jewishness or Jewish identity with Israel, which is insane because, of course, that is safeguarding Israel's right to commit genocide and to behave in any manner that it sees fit, because any criticism thereof would be deemed, according to the IHRA, as anti-Semitic. How do you see the recent wave since the day of the prescription? One of our writers was arrested, and there have been, now it seems, around 2,000 British people have been arrested and charged under the 2000 Terrorism Act. What's changed since your arrest to this summer?
Well, what's changed is Gaza became the litmus test of morality, legality, and rationality in the world. And that's good. That is really good that Gaza is now what apartheid South Africa was in the 70s and 80s. In other words, it has become internationalized and globalized in a way that it was never before. And that is why hundreds of millions and probably billions have marched in support of Gaza. This has never happened before. And it happened because people realize that their rights are taken if they are actually, if they shut up when they see this. They have betrayed themselves, they have betrayed their children and grandchildren, they've betrayed the future and have betrayed the past of humanity. And that is why people who have nothing to do with Gaza are going into the streets in so many countries demanding justice, because they feel it is to do with them. They feel they are connected to Gaza because this is a test of humanity, not of Israel, not of Britain. It's a test of humanity. Will humanity rise up and stop this, or will it continue to see governments everywhere supporting this against the law, against custom and practice, against morality? And so it has become a universal test. Now, The IHRA is a very old trick. It's more than 15 years in the making. And of course, it is not part of any legal system, at least in Europe. I think in the United States, the situation is somewhat different. But then the United States is different from the rest of humanity on so many other levels. So, in Britain, they have not made it part of the legal system in a way that you can actually be arrested for, against, the IHRA definitions. But they use it as a way of besmirching and tainting the many hundreds of thousands that are in the streets, as if they were racist, including, of course, people like myself, whose families were destroyed in the Holocaust. My parents were the only survivors of their families, and they were destroyed by Nazis. And now I'm told that I'm anti-Semitic and even Nazi because I'm opposing Israeli crimes. And everybody else that does that is also finding themselves tainted with that horrible crime.
Well, there's an irony in this, Haim, because one of the last bullet points, I'm on the Holocaust Remembrance site, and they make they make that list of rules and what is not allowed within their framework in order to reference anti-Semitism. And this is the rule that you've just drawn attention to, drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of Nazis. But what they've told all of us who've demonstrated against this genocide is they've made that link themselves, right? They are unconsciously admitting that there's something Nazi-like about what is going on by drawing the comparison themselves. Isn't that odd?
Of course, it's odd. The whole thing is odd, but they don't care about, logics. This is not about something being reasonable. It's a machinery that is useful for them to, and that's what it is about. It's not about discovering real anti-Semitism. They don't care about real anti-Semitism. Actually, the Israelis use real anti-Semitism very well. They are their best friends in Europe and in the United States are anti-Semites. They don't have a problem with real anti-Semitism. They only have a problem with anti-Zionism, with people who are saying what you're doing is unacceptable. Now, another thing is the fact that they are telling everyone that if you're Jewish, you're supporting Israel. Now, actually, this is not just true, but it's also anti-Semitism. Because if you treat Jews not as individuals who are thinking and taking decisions for themselves, but as automatons who are taking everything that Israel is doing in their stride and supporting it nonetheless, you are being anti-Semitic. So you're right. The whole thing is bizarre, is contradictory, is nothing to do with what it says on the can, and yet they do it because it works. I want to say another thing. Basically, there is nothing Jewish about genocide. There is nothing Jewish about settler colonialism. There is nothing Jewish about racism and apartheid towards the Palestinians, about killing children. This is not a Jewish historical value, but the opposite. Jews have suffered a lot from hatred and racism in Europe, not elsewhere, but in Europe. And Europe is a racist continent that invented, industrial slavery, exploitation through capitalism, imperialism and colonialism. The list goes on. Europe has invented the Holocaust and modern genocide, and yet it behaves as if it is against it, while supporting this, while supporting the murder of the Israelis, of Palestinians in Gaza, they are speaking as if they are the moral voice of humanity. This is disgusting. And it's also against Jewish history, tradition, and 2,000 years of life in Europe where Jews have suffered from racism. So to actually use that suffering to support genocide is especially disgusting and very disturbing that they can get away with it, and they can only get away with it because the elites in the West are not fighting back. The fighting back is done from the ground up. The Western elites are accepting this, the Western elites in the media, in cultural production, in the judiciary, in the financial sector. It is amazing that this is actually happening without an uproar of the whole of society, with the elites leading that uproar. This is not the case. I believe it's not the case in any other European country or in the United States, Canada, Australia, and the rest of the rotten West. So this is disturbing on a number of counts, breaking international law, breaking national law, breaking custom and practice, breaking the Genocide Convention, the human rights legislation of the UN, etc. And so all this is done when the Nazis killed millions, not just Jews, of course. They have killed many millions, half of which, or less than half of which, were Jewish. That was done very secretly. It was done, without any media coverage and without reporting, in a very difficult wartime in which you could actually cover things up very perfectly. So the Nazis obviously knew that what they're doing is terrifying, is wrong on every count, and that is why they were so secretive about it. They covered it up. The Israelis, on the contrary, are proud of their genocide. Soldiers of all ranks are sharing their crime with their families as a way of celebrating their daughter's or the wife's birthday. Here I am blowing up a university for my dear wife, which is, on her birthday. I'm blowing up a hospital, a university, a mosque, etc., and I'm sharing it on social media. So this is the most televised genocide, and that aspect is worse than the Holocaust. Not because they use a different technology. The Nazis didn't use any technology. There was a very advanced technology of printing and photography and film and so on that they could use to show the genocide. But they were, not mad. They knew that sharing a genocide is going to, condemn them forever. So they kept it very, very quiet. Now that Jews are doing genocide for the first time in their history, they are supposedly full of glee and pride. Pride about what? Is this part of Jewish tradition? This is the opposite of Jewish tradition. So not only is it illegal and immoral, it's also the most un-Jewish thing that you could do as a Jew. So I don't think Israel is a Jewish state. I don't think there's anything Jewish about what they're doing. I don't think there's anything human about what they're doing. They have exited the human club of the UN and humanity itself. And they are a law upon them, up to themselves. They are actually behaving in a way that the rest of humanity is actually unable to accept, quite rightly, and therefore, like South Africa before them, they have left humanity. South Africa was removed from the Club of Humanity, which is the United Nations General Assembly, because they didn't belong. And for 20 years, South African apartheid, the state that has started in 1948, like Zionism, has actually been ousted from the UNGA. After some years under Mandela, they were invited to join. So for 20 years, between 1974 and 1994, they were out of the club. Now, why is Israel not, the Israelis have done something which is 1,000 times worse. The South African did not bomb their populations with F-35s, with 2,000-pound bombs. They did not starve millions. They didn't do hardly any of the crimes that Israel is doing as a matter of course. So if it was right in 1974, and I believe not only was it right, it was highly necessary, why is Israel allowed to do all those things without any sanctions, without any action from the international community? I think that is very, very worrying. And that is one of the things that we should think of changing as a matter of urgency.
Well, you mentioned Desmond Tutu earlier, and he is on record as saying that Israeli apartheid is worse than what happened in South Africa. And this is something that many Israelis object to. But facts matter. And I want to head back to when I met you. You and I had attended this conference called The Languages of Gender at the University of Cyprus in Nicosia. The conference had ended and we were seated together at the same table, and there were those festivities, if you recall. And when I met you and your wife, Josefa, and I told you that after I gave another lecture on the north part, in the Turkish part of Cyprus, that I was heading towards Israel. And both of you took it upon yourselves, wisely so, to forewarn me of what I was about to experience. And I'll never forget thinking, oh God, I thought I was ready for this and what is going to happen. And if you recall, when I met you, I had my hair in these Pippi Longstocking braids. And I showed up to the airport in Tel Aviv just like that. And I was held about 2 a.m, I think we arrived, and I was held for hours in the airport. Actually, I think I arrived at 1. And I remember getting to my hotel around 5 that morning. And I was assailed with questions about what I was doing at the conference where I met both of you. Did you know that the last suicide bombers were trained in Cyprus, I was told? And I said, no, I'm sorry about that, but I was not training for that. And I had to show them the bulletins from the conferences I had spoken at. And I was grilled for hours. It was surreal. And then what I was about to experience in both Israel, more so in the occupied territories, was quite frightening. I thought of both of you after my first day in Jerusalem, in the West Bank. I was in Ramallah at first. And all the checkpoints, all the negative experiences I had with both IDF soldiers, but things I would see innocently in the city. People who were being harassed by the soldiers because they were selling their goods after 1800 hours, or because they were walking where they shouldn't walk, or an old man who was trying to be friendly to some children passing by. He reached out his hand and boom, a weapon was in his face. I was shocked. I grew up from the age of 10 in the Deep South. I've seen what we could call American racism. This was on a next level, something I had never experienced in Mississippi, not even a little bit, never witnessed it. Could you talk a bit about the mindset of Israelis? Because I think what's missing in a lot of the media coverage of what's basically astroturfing this genocide is the side of the Israelis. How are Israelis raised to understand what they believe to be their historical right to the land that they live on? And what are they told about Palestinians and their history and the land that effectively was colonized and taken from them?
Well, you started this by mentioning Archbishop Tutu, that said in, I believe, 2000, that the Israeli behavior towards Palestinians is much worse than apartheid ever was. Now, of course, when he said it, Israel was not committing genocide daily. So just think what happened in the last 25 years since he said that. And then we are talking in context. We're talking in context about the crime of our century. It is the crime of a lifetime. What has happened in Gaza, what is, I should say, happening in Gaza, because it didn't stop for even a moment just because Trump went to Sharm el-Sheikh and signed a piece of paper that was his application for a Nobel Peace Prize that was given to someone also criminal, but of South American origin. It was given to another friend of Netanyahu, but not to Trump. So his so-called peace agreement, which was a very long application for the Nobel Prize, has failed, at least for now. But it doesn't matter to him or to the Israelis that the actual agreement never stood a chance for 5 minutes. And it was broken on the day that it was signed. And since then, the average number of people killed has gone up rather than down. Yesterday, 104 people were killed. In Britain, when a child dies in Kiev, we hear about it on the main news. This is the first item on the main news. A child or, a mother and her baby died in Kiev last month in a Russian bombing or, drone attack and so on. It's the first item on the news. When hundreds of Palestinians die in Gaza, it's not making the news at all. The BBC is leading the lying and delusional media campaign of covering up what is happening in Gaza. Of course, you can read about it on social media, which is great news. But that's what I want to remind you of when you ask about what is happening in Israel. The media in Israel is not showing what happened last night in Gaza and what will happen today in Gaza. The Israeli media is from top to bottom, with one exception, and that is, a number of, off-center media outlets led by Haaretz of all, newspapers, and one or two other websites. Otherwise, everyone is listening and looking at the tissue of lies. Now, that this can continue in a time when everyone connected to the internet can see anything they want is a sign of social psychosis in Israel, because they know what is happening. Why? Because as opposed to the Nazi genocide that could be carried out by very, very devoted and committed individuals, members of the SS, a very small group of elite people who have operated both the killing squads in 1940 and 1941, and later on the 6 centers of death and destruction, you could, and it was a very efficient system because a very small number of people killed a huge number of people. Auschwitz, as an example, was killing 22,000 people a day, and all this was done by less than 100 SS members. The rest was done by the inmates, the Jewish and non-Jewish inmates who operated the system. So the Nazis have excelled in inventing a genocidal system which was industrialized. The Israelis are using more firepower than was used against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yeah, as I said, they already exceeded 8 nuclear bombs. But this is done also by a huge army. More than 300,000 Israelis were drafted into reserve service, and that's on top of the standing army of more than 150,000, and were brought into Gaza and around it in order to carry out this genocide. So even if they never actually see anything on the news, hundreds of thousands of Israelis are doing it, and they are speaking to their families. They are sending them, different video footage. They are speaking to them on the telephone daily, and they speak with their friends and family about what they're doing. Some more, some less, but there is no secret of what they are doing. So for Israelis to avoid public debate about it is actually a sign of social psychosis. They are disconnected from reality, and that reality is produced by them, not by anybody else. Of course, it's supported by the West, but collective West is creating a collective crime. But it is the Israeli hands that are bloodied. They are actually acting on behalf of the collective West. So for that society to deny the genocide, to deny the barbarities, to deny the starvation, to deny the denial of any rights or medications or fuel or electricity or food or clean water, to actually claim that what they're doing is somehow normal and acceptable. And not only that, they actually prove their delusion by describing themselves as the real victims. And they are describing themselves as victims of genocide by Hamas. Now, if the 1,200 Israelis who died on the 7th of October, and let us just remind the listeners that they were not all killed by Hamas and jihad. Maybe half of them, definitely most of the civilians, were killed by the Israelis, by the Israeli helicopters, which were shooting Hellfire missiles that work at a temperature of 1,200 degrees centigrade, and are melting cars with people inside them. And we all seen the pictures of more than 1,000 cars that were melted by Hellfire missiles. And the Israelis are the only ones in the Middle East that have Hellfire missiles. Of course, the Hamas hasn't got F-35 or Hellfire or anything that could actually produce this kind of fire. So if the killing of few hundred Israelis on the 7th of October was a crime, that is, the killing of civilians. I don't think the killing of soldiers is a crime. But if that was a crime, then how much larger is the crime committed by Israel? They have killed, the figures supplied by the Hamas Ministry of Health are nonsensical, of course. Not because they are trying to cheat anybody, but because they haven't got the means to actually count the dead or even find them, because a lot of them are actually under the rubble, probably more than were already buried and recorded. So I think what we are talking about in Israel is a social, a social psychosis, which I think most of the population is part of. For example, the Tel Aviv University had a number of polls in 2024 asking people a question that only in Israel will be asked. The question was a leading one. Is Israel using too much force in Gaza, too little force in Gaza, just the right amount force in Gaza? These were the questions. The answers, the number of people who answered just right or too little force in Gaza combined was 97%. Less than 3% thought that Israel is using too much force in Gaza. This is the most democratic genocide. This is the most sickening genocide, because it is a genocide by the whole population voting in a poll for its continuation. This has never happened before. If the Nazis were idiotic enough to take this to the population, saying, is what we're doing to the Jews too cruel, not cruel enough, or just right, they would be probably rejected by the German population. Now, in Israel, this is supported. This is like, a public vote for genocide. This is exactly what it is. And of course, only Jews were asked about it, and only Jews supported it. I think this is a very sick society, a society living in denial of its crimes, and by attributing to themselves the status of victims. I think this is sick.
You're listening to Savage Minds, and we hope you're enjoying the show. Please consider subscribing. We don't accept any money from corporate or commercial sponsors, and we depend upon listeners and readers just like you. Now, back to our show. When you mention, in fact, the way in which Israelis understand what's happening, it's fascinating to see how the media has rolled out this kind of what I call logical semantics war. We're given words for each side, right? It's a war. It's not a genocide. The Palestinians being exchanged for Israeli hostages. So they're prisoners versus hostages. The flotilla boats were intercepted. Had Hamas intercepted the boats, it would have been called kidnapping, clearly. And I'm thinking about the word genocide, because this has been something that has not been accepted by most legacy media outlets. But I point to a few polls that are interesting. The Economist YouGov poll in August of 2025 found that approximately half of U.S. voters believe Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. However, a YouGov poll conducted in June of 2025 resulted in 45% of Britons believing that Israel's actions in Gaza amount to genocide. There's a paradox here, because in Britain, you don't have the First Amendment. And I'm actually stunned by the amount of Zionist ideology coming out of people who consider themselves leftists, even though they're neoliberals. We know this. And they're Guardian readers, they're New Statesman readers. They are anti-war about most wars, but then it's a war. It's not a genocide. Why are so many Britons not understanding that this is a genocide? Hand in hand with, you see a lot of these same Guardian readers who espouse Zionism. They believe that that is their role. And we're not talking about Israeli Britons or Jewish Britons. The dearth of these individuals, I'm addressing these people within articles we run about criticizing the use of the rape fiction on 7 October to astroturf the spiritual absence of the humanity of Palestinians. Therefore, it's okay to mass murder them, right? And so what's happening there in Great Britain such that so many people who think of themselves as leftists are supporting a genocide and saying silly things like Israel has a right to exist, which isn't the point, is it?
Well, I don't think Israel has a right to exist, but we'll get to that. Your question is very important about Britain, and you mentioned The Guardian. And let me just go back into history, because as a historian, I look for the beginnings of a problem, not just the current appearance of the problem. In 1916, as you know, Britain, in the person of Lord Balfour, signed the Balfour Declaration, which was basically an odd document offering the Jewish people a country that Britain didn't hold, offering it to a people that had no right to it. So this was, in terms of a legal document, a very odd document written to an individual who did not represent the community that was not even defined in the document, offering something that they couldn't offer. They had no right to offer it to anybody, including themselves. So that declaration of 67 words was not written, as people think, by Lord Balfour. It was not also written by the Zionist head of the Federation that actually spoke with Balfour and the members of cabinet of the British government, Haim Weizmann. Balfour didn't write it because he didn't have the inclination or time or commitment. And Haim Weizmann didn't write it because he didn't have the command of English necessary. It was written by a person who brought Haim Weizmann to the cabinet, and that was, C.P. Scott, the first and very legendary editor of The Guardian, that was then called Manchester Guardian, but it's the same paper. And C.P. Scott was definitely the most liberal editor at the time, and he would have thought of himself as, I don't know if left-wing, but he definitely would use the word liberal about himself. So this is a history of more than a century of not just Britain in the person of the Secretary of State that signed it, but it is The Guardian, the most radical paper of the time, and the more liberal of the British papers even today, that has kept, the torch of Zionism ever since that day in 1916. So we're talking about a very long history, a very committed history of supporting Zionism. Both the Tory party and the Labour Party, and later on the Liberal Party, have been Zionists from the beginning, even before Jewish Zionism starts its appearance in Europe at the end of the century. Ever since 1848 or so, Christian Zionism has in Britain been very rampant in government and elite circles, including, in literary circles, very importantly. George Eliot, Disraeli, in their novels, they have written a whole number, each of them, of Zionist novels, Christian Zionist novels. So Britain has a very particular and specific history of Christian Zionism in the 19th century, and this continues. And the fact that most of Christian Zionism now live in the United States is neither here or there, because in the 19th century, they were not Zionists. In the 19th century, it was the British elite who started Zionism. And these were for very good imperial reasons. They wanted to control Palestine, and they needed a kind of hook, an ideological, and in this case also proto-historical, and I would say religious. And it had nothing to do with real history. It was very useful to have Christian Zionism when they wanted to control Palestine, because it was important for the protection of the canal, the Suez Canal, and the route to India that was already on its last legs as a colony, but they didn't know that, and they would do anything to preserve the link to India as a colony. So when you talk about Britain, you talk about a very specific history, and the fact that all the country's parties are committed, as they were in 1916, to this link, to this. The empire is gone. The thinking behind the empire is alive. Britain is not an empire. It's probably not a fifth, order of a country, but it's not in the first line for sure. But the way of thinking about power and control in the Middle East especially, and in Asia on the whole, is alive and well in Britain, as if they were still ruling India. And that is also a social psychosis of a kind akin to what there is in Israel. And Britain is helping Israel to fulfill a function. Israel is a chaos engine, a chaos and destruction and death engine operating for the West in the Middle East, holding the control and actually assaying destruction, assaying chaos, making one country after another into political and military and financial and social basket cases. Look at Lebanon, look at Syria, look at Iraq, at Libya, Sudan, Yemen, and probably very soon they will try Iran and later Afghanistan. Pakistan. They are talking about that in Hebrew every day. There is no covering of their aims and objectives. So Israel is a long-term destructive engine of the West in the Middle East, carrying out the project of destroying societies and making them manageable as subject societies that have no will of themselves. They are not allowed that. They're run by Al-Qaeda and subgroups of Al-Qaeda like HST in Syria, in Libya by two terror groups, in Sudan. You can see what is happening. They are actually destroying country after country. And that's why they need to destroy Iran. And now they speak about destroying Turkey as an independent force. To think about Iran and Turkey, those two very large, powerful, and states with long imperial history, to be candidates for destruction by Israel is deeply psychotic. I'm not talking about the fact that it's criminal, but it's deeply psychotic. But this is what Israel is doing. This is what the Israelis specialize at doing, and that's why they are paid and fed and of course armed and supported by the West. The declining West is now, as opposed to what, for example, the Chinese are doing, they are actually advancing by building. Belt and Road Initiative, they build ports, they build airports, they build railways, they build. This is what they do in order to advance their power. Their power is great, but they don't actually destroy. They don't build armaments, army camps in other countries. China has 3 bases outside of its mainland base. The United States had 1,000 army camps outside of its mainland base. So this is where the difference between the West and the East is very clear. BRICS on the whole is a place which is building itself and building in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa. They are building the new societies of the rest, while the West is destroying those societies. And I think Israel is the main machinery of that destruction. We cannot not see this. This is the subject of my new book I'm working on. Israel as an engine of chaos and destruction. You cannot overlook that.
There's another genocide that gets less attention, which is the genocide occurring now in Sudan. And it's all very overwhelming because just taking care of daily media intake, and people are having genocide fatigue. A lot of people have been theorizing that the declarations last month at the UN were all talk, nice talk, a little too late because declarations of Palestinian statehood, that was at the time of Oslo. But it's all very nice to be able to declare Palestinian statehood or the intention to respect that and to support that while doing absolutely nothing. Because here we have, yes, I'm in agreement with what you say about China and the Belt Road Initiative and BRICS, and these are all very interesting possibilities for a future that perhaps we might one day see treaties where it makes it completely illegal to ship arms anywhere outside of your national boundaries or supplying components for arms outside of the national boundaries. Because what happens in Sudan, that genocide has been driven also by arms supplies by countries like Iran, Russia, Turkey, China, and Serbia. That does get less discussion, and for obvious reasons, because the genocide in Gaza has been not just ongoing since October 2023. Many people have called the situation in the occupied territories a slow genocide. We've had many news reports prior to 2023 where Israel at will blows out a church, kills a bunch of Palestinians, does not allow people to cross the Mahsam to get to hospitals. They die at the checkpoints, and on and on. But here, supplying Israel with weapons. Number one, the major actor in this is my country, the United States, which accounts for 69% of Israel's arms imports between 2019 and 2023, and since 7 October has accelerated, giving to Israel ammunition and bombs, aircraft and components for those aircraft, air defense systems, And Germany accounts for 30% of Israel's arms imports, again, between 2019 and 2023, of ammunitions and weapons and naval components. And then the United Kingdom, they supply components and munitions, and they account for very little compared to the first two actors in this, along with Italy. Italy is considered the third, actually, amounting to 1% of total imports. And then you've had countries like Spain, the Netherlands, Canada, Belgium, who've said, we're stopping, and Australia as well. They have stated that they have had no weapons provided to Israel since the start of the 7 October conflict, is what they called it. So, given the facts on the ground that you've got the United States and Germany supplying almost all of the weapons, is there not some sick irony in Germany's participation in this genocide?
Well, Germany is the only country I know of which is responsible for multiple genocides. As you know, it started its genociding activities very early in the 20th century with the Herero and other massacres in southern Africa. So the fact that Germany is now involved in its fourth genocide is not surprising. It shouldn't be surprising. It shouldn't be surprising to people to learn that Germany is now rearming with Russia as its main target, because Germany has done so already twice before in the 20th century. It shouldn't surprise people to hear that a country which is more and more fascist by the day, and some of it is neo-Nazi, is now supplying a genocide with arms. And it shouldn't surprise us to know that it is increasing its armed forces in order to be able to attack Russia. And yet, people are not relating to this. It's a terrible thing to learn that Friedrich Merz actually thinks that Israel should be supported in its genocide in Palestine because it's doing dirty work for us. So at least Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, admits that genocide is the West's dirty work. It also happens in Sudan, as you pointed out. It happens in Syria. It happened in Libya and is not over. And now it is joined not just by the collective West, but by Arab regimes of the kind that we used to call different names before. And now they supposedly are our friends and colleagues and partners. Those Arab regimes, which are authoritarian and have already given rise to more than one terror organization, that attacked in different places on earth, are now attacking in Sudan. They did before in Yemen. So these are actually willing machineries of the West, ready to do its bidding, exactly like Israel. So Israel is now joined through the process of normalization of Zionism by Arab regimes that are doing their own genocide work in their own backyard. This is the West. I'm sorry, but, the West has not learned from its terrifying history. If it learned anything, it's to subcontract its dirty work to other regimes, which actually were built on the ashes of the great last genocide in the Second World War. I think every part of this, this multi-genocide, it's not a single genocide, it's a Western genocide spread over, at the moment, mainly the Middle East and East Africa and North Africa. It's a huge region. It's a very crucial region historically, culturally, religiously, philosophically. In many ways, it is the heart of many cultures that are alive today. It's definitely the heart of monotheism. We no longer are discussing a single genocide. We're talking about the Western, the collective West, using genocide in a number of locations in the Middle East and West Asia and East Africa and North Africa. A very important cultural and historical center of so many developments, mainly religious, but also cultural and many other areas, technological, etc. Now, what we're talking about is destroying human history. It's removing the evidence to that history, not just in the minds of people, but removing them from the ground. Israel has destroyed a culture in Gaza that existed for more than 6 millennia. Gaza, together with Jaffa and Jericho, is one of the oldest cultural centers and centers of urban development in history. So what the West is doing is removing traces of cultural activity, of economic activity, of agricultural activity, of the churches, mosques, and synagogues that gave us much of the morality that humanity is supposedly holding to. What we are destroying is everything that we keep saying we hold dear in the West. The West is sick. It's not very well. It's on the way out as a control center. And the most dangerous time of any empire is when it is dwindling and declining very fast. This is where it does the massacres, the genocides, the grand mistakes of its rule that it didn't have to resort to before. It resorts to all of those in its period of decline and fall. That's what happens in the West. Any historian worth its name, would point out that that's an imperial machinery, and that's what is happening. The empire is declining and falling. The best sign for that is the leadership of the West in the hands of course, Donald Trump, of Friedrich Merz, or Keir Starmer, such giants of idiocy and criminality. They are.
Yeah, no, I
That's
agree.
what they are.
I said to someone recently that we would have been better off had the Tories won.
Well, we would be better off if monkeys took over, because they would not be so destructive. Yeah, we would be better off with any living creature but Western humanity. And yet, here are the very well-educated elites in the universities, in the media, in cultural production, all the centers of power of the West, not saying a single word against what is happening. This is left to activists. This is left to the few historians that cannot avoid the understanding that is part of being a historian. Yeah, we've seen it before. The sinking of an empire is a very dangerous time, and the signs. Caligula would be a genius in comparison to Trump. Yeah, even Caligula's horse would be a giant compared to Trump. That's what we're talking about. We are talking about being ruled by, the leftover of humanity. I'm not saying this in order to be funny. I don't find it to be funny at all. I think it's very terrifying. So this is what we're talking about.
Well, I'm laughing about the way you say it because, you're right. There's nothing funny about it. But honestly, what we are facing it reminds me that we've gone back in time, forget the Enlightenment, forget all of that. We are in the collapse of Western civilization, and people don't know this yet. I think back to some of the cliches that have popped out all over again, many Islamophobic cliches. And I think back to these texts, Ptolemy's Almagest, the works of Euclid, the works of Archimedes, many of the texts of Aristotle, Plato, and Neoplatonist texts. All of these texts were destroyed in Europe during the destruction of libraries and cities in post the Roman Empire and at the end of the Roman Empire by various groups, the Goths, the Vandals, the Huns, the Franks, pillaging, destroying all of Western literature. Who saved this literature? The Arabs.
The Arab-Muslims.
That's right. Yeah. And it was the golden age of the Arabo-Islamic world where they had scholars who worked at institutions like what is in English called the House of Wisdom, Bayat al-Hikmah, and in Baghdad and in Andalusia in Spain, you had active projects of translations. All of the texts that we are taught in high school and university, we have Arabs and Muslims to thank for this. Meanwhile, we're living this all over again. The idiocy that you speak about, the horse, the monkeys ruling us, yes, we'd be better off because we're in this period of complete, political and societal collapse at this point. And the irony is that Germany is pawning off its support of Israel as somehow this mea culpa to the Holocaust that so many people are believing. This is what beggars belief about the whole thing, is that they're claiming by supporting this genocide over there, they're making up for the last one they did.
Well, if this is mea culpa, basically you don't actually atone for one genocide by supporting another. But that doesn't seem to be a problem in Germany. Also, I need to say that the time of convivencia that you spoke about so eloquently when you described the Muslim rule that saved Western civilization from itself by preserving the most important text, the plays that were written in Greece were kept by the Muslims for us so that hundreds of years later we could read them in Greek again. They were not available because they were burnt by the Western churches. So I think one thing which we don't even discuss enough is the fact that the West has invented also modern racism in Spain of the Reconquista against a period where people were attacked because of their views, for example, for being Muslim. They moved to the purity of blood principle, which today we would call genetics, and were developing racial hatred as part of the genes. In other words, you are an enemy because you were born Muslim, not because you became a Muslim or became Jewish. But you are born as a Muslim. You are born a Jew. You cannot change that. And therefore, the genetic justification of racism was born in that period of the Reconquista, and it's still alive. So the Islamophobia that you are describing is not different than the Islamophobia of the 11th century that drove millions to go to the Holy Land and destroy the Muslim polities that controlled it. Just to remind people, the library of the Caliph in Cordoba, for example, included not just more books than the rest of Europe together, but actually the figure is 1,000 times more books than the rest of Europe together, because in Europe the books were burnt, like in other periods later on, for example, by Nazi Germany. So Europe was a place where books were burned, and the Muslim regimes were a place where books were sacred and were written in all languages known to those people and made available to the public across the Muslim East and North. So basically, we are actually going back to a period of burning the books. Trump is an example of this, but also the kind of legislation that now silences people in Britain, in Germany, in France, in Italy, etc., is also of the same ilk of silencing intellect, silencing criticism, silencing those voices which are destructive and hateful. So this is, I think, what we are now facing. And as a historian, I want to say there cannot be a good result to this unless the culture itself rises, stops it, and goes back to the principles of the Renaissance that could never happen without the developments in Al-Andalus. Al-Andalus is the engine of the Renaissance, is the engine of science, is the engine of philosophy, of Western civilization. It's coming from there rather than from Rome or Berlin or London, that were remote and destructive little principalities. Yeah, and the culture that we call Western actually emanated from a Muslim polity in which Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived in harmony, created in harmony in its in other languages. Maimonides wrote Hebrew in Arabic characters and Arabic in Hebrew characters. This was the kind of intimacy that gave rise to the Renaissance and gave rise to a period where rationalism and understanding of history were ruling developments. Everything destructive was actually in Europe already. It did not come from the East. It did not come from the South. Europe has produced its own toxins and is now wallowing in the same toxins again. And woe to all of us that will have to face the results.
Yesterday, actually, I was speaking with a gentleman, and when he heard I was in Morocco, and he said, Oh, isn't the first university in Morocco the first university in the
Exactly.
world? And I said to him, I want to kiss you because Italians are constantly saying l'Università di Bologna. And I say, no, I always have to tell Italians it's the University of El Cairauian in Fez, which was founded by a woman, right? Take that, feminists. So for all of the astroturfing of the rape narrative on 7 October that has been debunked over and over, but facts don't matter, right? It's phenomenal, the aporia of knowledge within European public institutions, and I include schools and universities, where people are not taught these basic facts about, just as you said, we would not have had the Renaissance were it not for what occurred in what is today Spain and North Africa. The Renaissance was born there, and we are just crapping all over our own legacy. It just amazes me because when I see the Hasbara that came out immediately after 7 October and the rape narratives, I was very upset because the reports were immediately not credible. Some of the media reports were just, no one speaks like that. Some of the Zaka witnesses, I don't believe what he's saying. Because you know how it is when you read enough media stories, you can tell when something sounds fake. I have to wonder how it is that the media has had such a hold on people. It's not like we're in the 1980s where people had the choice of 3 channels in the US, plus the 4th was public television. And if you had cable, you had the new CNN. Now, people have a search engine. Everyone has a mobile phone. They can Google information. What do you think is driving people to believe such as the rape fictions and the other madness that erupted right on the heels of 7 October?
Well, I think that it's easier to accept what is offered you either in the supermarket or in the supermarket of, ideas that the West has become. Everything is for sale. Everything is for profit. And basically, the great companies that developed in the 90s as do no evil, as you remember, are now doing the evil on behalf of Israel and the West. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, all of them are actually evildoers and evil actors. Israel is keeping its data that helps it to kill people in Gaza and the rest of Palestine, and also in Iran and other countries, on those servers, and actually signing contracts, as we learned this week, that are actually forcing those companies, supposedly against their will, but who could actually be more powerful than them, to actually break the law internationally, not just nationally, and allow Israel to break the law using those servers. So I think we're talking about very powerful forces that are supporting Israel. And they are supporting Israel because Israel is important for the destructive project that I described. People are not hearing this on the mainstream media, and it's easier to be lazy, despite all this offer at your fingertips. It's easier not to think by listening to 10 sources and making the point. It's easier for people to accept what is offered them in the supermarket of views than to actually work their own views. They have all the tools at their disposal, but that means work. That means having to listen to a range of views and making your mind up. Making your mind up is difficult, requires thinking, and also requires judgment, and also is dangerous because for example, you or me have made our mind up, and now we're facing the consequences. The law is after people like us who made up our mind about what is happening. So I think it's much easier to act like a consumer of views, not like a producer of views. I think that is the problem of the West.
You said earlier that Israel does not have a right to exist. Could you extrapolate on your thoughts here?
Israel does not have a right to exist because its right to exist is based on denying that same right to the people of Palestine. The United States in the 18th century did not have a right to exist because its right to exist depended on a huge genocide of 15 million people of the continent of North America. Now, of course, now that it's killed all of those people, and they are not there to speak, it does exist, but its existence is based on one of the largest crimes of humanity. So if Israel manages to do what the United States have managed so well, it will have changed history because it existed despite the fact that it didn't have a right, by destruction and by genocide. It created its right to exist because all those people who were the signs of its lack of right to exist will no longer be there to speak. And there is no speaker for the dead, as you know. So at the moment, what we must do is protect the right of people to speak and to exist in Palestine as Palestinians. The Zionist project has no right to exist, and no more right to exist than the white supremacist project had in South Africa. Humanity said apartheid is illegal, is immoral, is irrational. We don't want it. It has to go. This is what we need to say about Zionism. We're not saying that the people living there have no right to exist. We're saying that the project, the supremacist project of Zionism, the racist, destructive, murderous, genocidal project of Zionism has no right to exist in the 21st century. It had no right in the 20th century. It had no right in the 19th century when it was thought of and worked out. It has definitely no right today. And we should make sure that it doesn't exist as a project by liberating the Palestinians and indeed those Israeli Jews from the ravages that Zionism has brought to the world and from the terrifying choices that it forces our society to make.